The wind moved like a whisper across the plains, soft but endless, carrying the scent of dust and rain. A lone rider moved through it, Jonas Redden, his hat low, his coat heavy with travel, and his horse's steps slow and steady on the dry ground. He hadn't spoken to another soul in weeks. That suited him fine. To the towns he passed, he was just another drifter. But to those who remembered Fort Sutter, he was something else entirely. The deserter. That word followed him like a curse, painted on every wanted poster nailed to a saloon wall. Jonas didn't bother to tear them down anymore. He knew running changed nothing. The sun dropped low, painting the sky in blood and gold. Jonas looked out over the horizon and saw smoke, thin, rising in the distance. He didn't want to care. Trouble wasn't his to chase anymore. But something in him, something he'd tried to bury, stirred at the sight. By nightfall he reached what was left of a cabin. The air smelled of ash and sorrow. The door hung loose, one hinge melted black. He climbed down from his horse, gun drawn, boots crunching over the burned remains of someone's life. A faint sound reached him, a breath or maybe a prayer. He followed it around the corner of the ruined cabin. There, beside a dying campfire, a woman sat against a wagon wheel, her hands trembling as she pressed a strip of cloth to her side. Blood soaked through her dress. Her hair was tangled, her eyes glassy with fear. When she saw Jonas, she tried to raise the pistol in her lap. "Stay back," she rasped, voice rough from smoke. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said, lowering his gun. Her hand shook harder. "You one of them?" "One of whom?" "The men who burned my home." Her arm dropped and the pistol fell into the dirt. She tried to reach it, but her strength gave out. Jonas crouched, keeping his voice even. "No, ma'am. I just came by the smoke." She looked at him with a mix of fear and disbelief. "They said they'd come back for me," she whispered. "Said I'd die here, same as my husband." Jonas felt the words like stones in his gut. He looked at the wreckage, the burned tools, the trampled soil. Whoever had done this hadn't left mercy behind. "You need a doctor," he said. "Closest town's 20 miles, she muttered, half-conscious. "Won't make it," Jonas set his jaw. He wasn't a healer. He wasn't even a good man by most measures. But he couldn't leave her. Not like this. He lifted her gently, carrying her inside what little roof still stood. She stirred once, whispering something too soft to catch. He built a small fire, boiled water, and cleaned the wound as best he could. She didn't wake again. When the fire burned low, Jonas sat beside her, staring at the flicker on the walls. The smoke scratched his throat, but he didn't move. Outside, coyotes called in the distance. He thought of his own men, faces he still saw when sleep came too close. They'd died screaming his name, and he'd been the one left breathing. He took the woman's pistol from the dirt, brushed the ash off, and set it beside her. "You'll be safe tonight," he muttered. He meant it as a promise, though he wasn't sure why. When dawn came, pale and cold, Jonas stepped outside to check the horizon. No sign of riders, just the wind and the endless plain. He turned back toward the burned cabin, unsure what waited for him next, but knowing one thing for certain. For the first time in years, he had stayed instead of running. Maren woke to the sound of crackling fire and the smell of coffee. For a moment she didn't remember where she was. Then the pain in her side returned, sharp and deep. She turned her head and saw the stranger Jonas kneeling by the fire, stirring a small pot with a stick. He noticed her eyes open and spoke without turning. "You're lucky." The bullet went clean through. "Infection's what you need to worry about now." Maren's throat was dry. "You patched me up?" He nodded once. "Best I could." She tried to sit up, but the movement made her wince. "You should have left me," she said. Jonas looked at her then, his eyes calm, unreadable. "Couldn't do that. You don't even know me," he shrugged. "Didn't need to." Outside, the plains shimmered under morning light. Her home, what was left of it, smoked gently in the wind. The sight made her stomach twist. Everything she'd built with her husband was gone. Jonas handed her a cup. Drink, you need strength. She took it with trembling hands. The coffee was bitter, but it steadied her. You have a name? Jonas, he said simply. She studied him. His face looked carved from stone, weathered, quiet, but tired in a way that came from more than travel. His coat was patched, his revolver well kept. A soldier, she guessed, or something close to it. What were you doing out here? She asked, passing through. Where to? He gave a faint smirk. Nowhere in particular. That answer told her everything and nothing. She turned her gaze toward the ruined barn. They killed my husband, she said quietly. Took our mule. Burned the wheat. Left me thinking I'd die here. Jonas's jaw tightened. You see their faces? One of them wore a Union coat, she said. Old and faded like a trophy. He had a scar down his cheek. The others followed his word. Jonas froze at that. A scarred man. A soldier's coat. It wasn't much, but something in it twisted deep inside him. You know him? She asked, noticing the change in his eyes. He looked away. Maybe. Silence sat between them for a long time. Only the wind moved, sighing through what remained of the cabin walls. Marin broke it first. I'm not leaving. This land's all I've got left. Jonas didn't argue. He only glanced toward the horizon where smoke still rose faintly from the east. You'll need help rebuilding. Those men might come back. Her gaze hardened. Then I'll be ready. He admired her grit, though he saw how weak she still was. She could barely stand, let alone fight. He told himself he'd stay one night more, just until she could move on her own. Then he'd be gone. But that evening, when he took his horse to the creek for water, he saw something that changed his mind. In the sand near the bank, fresh hoof prints. Not his, not hers. At least 3 riders passing close. When he returned, he found Marin struggling to stand, gathering what little food remained. They'll come back, she said. I can feel it, he didn't disagree. Then I'll stay until they don't. She looked at him, suspicion and hope flickering in her tired eyes. Why, you owe me nothing, he didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled the rifle from his saddle and checked the chamber. Because running's not always the answer. The wind picked up again, carrying dust across the open fields. Jonas set another log on the fire and stood watch at the doorway while the sun fell behind the plains. He told himself it was just one more night. But deep down, something in him knew he wasn't leaving soon. By the 3rd morning, the smell of smoke had faded, replaced by the scent of damp earth and wild sage. Jonas had gathered what wood he could find and started rebuilding the fence line. The rhythm of work gave him something to hold on to, something simple, honest, and quiet. Marin watched him from the porch, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She was still pale, but her strength was returning. The wound hurt less now, though she could feel every pull of the stitches when she moved. You work like a man who's trying not to think, she said softly. Jonas didn't look up. Thinking never built anything. That made her smile a little, but only for a moment. You plan to leave soon? He paused, set down the hammer. When you can walk steadily. I can walk steadily now. He turned and raised an eyebrow. Show me. She tried, she really did, but her knees buckled halfway down the steps. Jonas caught her before she hit the ground. Reckon I'll stay another day, he said, helping her back up. She scowled, embarrassed. I don't need a nurse. Good, he replied. I'm no nurse. They both laughed, a sound neither had expected. It faded quickly, but it was real. That afternoon, Jonas rode to the creek again to check the trail. The hoofprints from before were fading, washed by the night's rain. Still, something in the air made him uneasy. He'd been hunted before. He knew what it felt like when eyes followed you unseen. When he returned, Marin had found an old broom handle and was using it to sweep the ashes out of the doorway. No sense letting them win twice, she said when he looked at her. He nodded, respect softening his face. You got grit, I'll give you that. Grit's all a woman's got when the world burns down. That night they ate beans and hard bread by the fire. Neither spoke for a long time. The silence wasn't awkward, just heavy with unspoken things. Jonas finally said, You ever think about leaving this place behind? Starting over somewhere else? Maren shook her head. This land's where my husband's buried. If I leave, he dies twice. He looked into the fire, the flames flickering in his tired eyes. You sound like someone who's lost too much already. And you sound like someone who's still running from it. Her words struck deeper than she meant them to. He turned his gaze away, jaw tight. She noticed but didn't apologize. The next morning a wagon passed in the distance, a trader heading toward the nearest town. Maren waved him down and bought a few supplies with coins she'd hidden in a jar beneath the porch. Jonas helped carry the sack inside. When he saw the man's eyes linger on him, something cold passed between them. You from around here? The trader asked, casual but wary. Just passing through, Jonas said. The trader nodded slowly, then spat into the dirt. You look a lot like a man I saw on a bounty notice out near Fort Sutter. Maren froze. Jonas said nothing, only lifted the sack of grain as if the words hadn't been spoken. When the wagon rolled away, she turned to him. Is it true? He didn't meet her eyes. Depends on what the poster said. It said deserter, she answered quietly. That he left his men to die. Jonas set the sack down hard. That's not the story. Then tell me the real one, she said. He walked to the doorway, staring out at the plains where the sky met the earth. Another time, he said, voice low. When it matters. But that night, as the fire crackled and the stars burned above, she could tell from the way he stared into the dark that the ghosts he carried weren't far behind. The days passed quietly after that, marked by work and long silences. Jonas mended what he could, the roof, the fence, the barn door still half hanging. Maren kept to small tasks, sweeping the floor, boiling water, and stitching old fabric into curtains. The homestead began to look less like a graveyard, and more like a place meant for the living again. But between them hung an invisible wall built from questions neither dared to ask. One evening, when the sun was red and low, Jonas sat sharpening his knife on the porch. Maren came out and sat near him, her hands folded in her lap. You said that bounty poster wasn't the full story, she began carefully. Jonas kept sharpening, the sound of metal against stone soft and steady. It isn't. Then what is? He stopped, looked at her. For the first time she saw not just tiredness in his eyes, but guilt. I wasn't supposed to retreat, he said quietly. We were ordered to hold our ground at Red Ridge, but the line broke and the officer in charge, Captain Halden, ran first. My men followed. I stayed behind to cover them. Maren frowned. That doesn't sound like desertion. No, Jonas said. But Halden made sure it did. He told her how the captain blamed him for the failure, how the reports twisted the truth, how the survivors were too afraid to speak up. He'd been branded a deserter, hunted like a criminal. When the war ended, I thought about clearing my name, Jonas said. But every time I tried, someone else died. Men who helped me disappeared. So I stopped trying. Maren's voice softened. You've been running ever since. He nodded once. Running's easier than burying more good men. The silence that followed was thick and heavy, but it wasn't cold. Maren looked at him differently now. Not as a stranger, but as someone broken in ways she understood. Later that night, a storm rolled over the plains. The wind moaned through the boards and the rain came down hard. Lightning flashed in the distance, lighting up the horizon like gunfire. Jonas stood watch by the window, eyes scanning the dark between flashes. He didn't see anything at first until one flash revealed movement. 3 figures on horseback far out. Just shapes against the lightning. He grabbed his rifle. Maren came to his side. What is it? Riders, he said. Same ones, maybe. Her hand went to her wound instinctively. They found us. Could just be passing through, do you believe that? Jonas didn't answer. He watched the horizon until the storm swallowed it whole. By morning, the tracks were gone, washed away by the rain. But both of them knew what it meant. The raiders were near again. Jonas saddled his horse and rode toward the hills to scout. The world was quiet after the storm, the sky pale and wide. In the distance, he found a campfire still smoking, the ashes warm. 3 bedrolls. One of them held something, a scrap of fabric from a burned cabin. Marin's cabin. When he returned, she was waiting at the gate. "They're close, aren't they?" He nodded. "Too close." Her face went pale, but her voice was steady. "Then we get ready." That afternoon they worked side by side. Jonas taught her to reload the rifle and showed her where to aim. She moved more slowly than she liked, but her hands were sure. "You ever kill a man before?" he asked. She shook her head. "But I've buried one because I didn't." The answer settled deep in him. As the sun dropped, they set lanterns in the windows, making the house look lived in and unworried. But inside, every door was barred and every gun was loaded. Jonas sat near the fire that night, cleaning his revolver.
"If they come," he said quietly, "I'll draw them off."
"You stay hidden." Marin looked at him, anger flashing in her eyes. "You think I'll let you die for me?" He met her gaze. "I've died for worse reasons." She didn't look away. Not this time. Outside, the wind carried the sound of a lone coyote. Jonas stared into the fire and said nothing, but in his heart he knew the fight was already coming. The next morning came gray and cold. Jonas woke before sunrise, listening to the stillness outside. Even the wind had stopped moving. It was the kind of silence that came before something bad. He stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand, and scanned the plains. The tracks from last night were faint, but there, 3 sets of hooves cutting through the mud toward the ridge. He knew they'd circle back soon. Inside, Marin packed what little food they had into a sack. "If they come, we'll need to run," she said. Jonas shook his head. "No running," her brow furrowed. "You'd rather die here?" "I'd rather finish what they started." She studied him for a moment. "You mean what you started," she said quietly. "This isn't just about them, is it?" Jonas didn't answer. His silence told her everything. They spent the rest of the morning preparing. Jonas reinforced the door with planks. Marin loaded bullets into the rifle with steady hands. The rhythm of their work was tense but focused, like 2 people building a wall between fear and courage. By noon, clouds gathered again, thick and heavy. Jonas checked his revolver one last time, then walked the fence line, scanning the open land. He caught sight of something near the ridge, a flash of metal, maybe sunlight on a rifle barrel. "They're watching," he muttered. Marin joined him, clutching her shawl tight. "How many?" "3 that I can see." "Maybe more." Her jaw tightened. "Then they'll come when it's dark." Jonas nodded. "That's when men like them prefer to kill." The day crawled by. Every sound felt sharp. The creak of the wood, the flap of a shutter in the wind. Marin tried to keep her hands busy, but her thoughts drifted to her husband, to the night the raiders came. The fear then was wild and senseless. This time it felt different. The fear had shape, but so did her will. As dusk fell, Jonas lit no lanterns. He moved like a shadow through the cabin, every step measured. "When it starts," he whispered, "don't fire unless you have to." "Make your shots count," Marin nodded. "And if you fall?" He glanced at her, eyes steady. "Then you finish it." The sun disappeared completely, leaving only the faint glow of the fire. Outside, the plains went black. A coyote howled far off, then another answered closer. But the sound that followed wasn't from any animal. It was a horse's snort, muffled voices, and boots shifting in dirt. Jonas crouched by the window, peering through a crack in the wall. He saw them then, 3 riders moving slowly, keeping low in the dark. The man in front wore a long coat and a wide-brimmed hat. Lightning flashed for a moment, revealing the scar that ran down his cheek. Marin's breath caught. "That's him." Jonas didn't move. "Stay low." The men dismounted quietly and spread out. Jonas watched one move toward the barn, another toward the side window. The scarred man walked straight to the front door. When he knocked, it wasn't gentle. "Evening?" he called, voice slick with mockery. "Heard a deserter's been hiding here. Thought I'd stop in and see for myself." Jonas didn't answer. His hand hovered over his revolver, the metal cool under his fingers. Jonas reddened. The man called again. "You should have stayed gone. Captain Halden doesn't forget debts." The name hit like a gunshot. Halden, the man who'd ruined him, was still alive. And this scarred man was his hound. Jonas leaned close to the door. "You tell Halden," he said, voice calm but sharp. "He should have finished the job back then." The man outside laughed. "Oh, I aimed to." A heartbeat later, glass shattered. A bullet ripped through the window, splintering wood. Marin ducked behind the table, clutching the rifle. Jonas rolled to the side and fired once, clean and fast. A cry came from the barn. The fight had begun. Jonas moved for the doorway, his revolver steady in both hands. Outside, thunder rolled over the plains, matching the rhythm of the gunfire. And in the flashes of lightning, the man with the scar smiled through the rain. Gunfire cracked through the night, sharp and echoing across the plains. Jonas fired again, hitting the shadow near the barn. The man dropped, but another took his place, crawling through the grass toward the porch. Inside, Marin stayed low, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her wound. Every flash of lightning threw wild shapes across the walls. She gripped the rifle tight, remembering Jonas's words, "Make your shots count." Jonas ducked behind a post as a bullet tore through the porch rail. He waited, counted the breaths between shots, then stepped out and fired twice. One bullet found its mark. The other sang into the night. Rain began to fall, slow at first, then steady, washing dust into mud. The thunder rolled closer, drowning out the last echo of gunfire. Jonas moved quickly, dragging the wounded man from the yard. The scarred man shouted from somewhere in the dark, "You can't hide forever, Redden."
"Halden says your time's up,"
Jonas shouted back. "Halden can ride out here himself if he wants me dead." The man laughed, a sound cold as iron. "He's too busy polishing his metals, but me? I'll collect your bounty and your bones." Jonas ducked back inside, dripping with rain, his face grim. "Two left," he said quietly. Marin stood near the table, pale but steady. "You're bleeding." He looked down, there was blood on his sleeve. "Not bad." She tore a strip of cloth from her apron and tied it tight around his arm. "You said not to fire unless I had to." He nodded. "You have to now." They waited. The storm raged outside, masking the sound of footsteps until one came too close. Boots on the porch boards. Jonas gestured to the back wall, whispering, "Stay down." The door burst open with a crash. The scarred man stepped in, revolver drawn, eyes gleaming in the firelight. "You're a hard man to kill, Redden," he sneered. "But orders are orders." Jonas fired first. The shot caught the man's hat, spinning it off his head. The raider answered with two quick rounds, one grazing Jonas's ribs. Marin raised the rifle, aimed slowly, and pulled the trigger. The blast knocked her shoulder back, but the shot flew true. The second man, creeping through the window, fell before he reached the door. The scarred man turned toward her, eyes burning. Jonas rushed him. The two men collided, crashing against the table, knocking the firewood aside. The revolver fell, skittering across the floor. Jonas struck hard, but the raider was strong, stronger than he looked. They grappled in the dark, each trying to reach for the fallen gun. The rain hissed on the roof. The thunder shook the walls. Marin tried to move closer, but her leg gave out beneath her. "Jonas," she cried. He slammed the man against the wall, breath ragged. "You tell Halden," he growled. "The truth dies with me or with you." The man spat blood, grinning. "Then we both go down." He reached for a hidden knife, but Jonas was faster. The blade flashed once, then fell from the man's hand. The raider stumbled, clutching his chest, and dropped to the floor. Jonas stood still, panting, staring at the lifeless body. The fight was over. Marin crawled toward him, trembling. "Is it done?" He looked around. "It's done." The cabin was quiet now, except for the storm. Jonas leaned against the wall, exhaustion taking hold. Marin reached for his arm, her hand small and shaking. "You saved us." He shook his head. "You saved yourself." Outside, dawn began to break through the storm clouds, turning the plains a pale silver. The bodies lay in the yard, washed clean by the rain. Jonas went out and buried them at the edge of the field, marking each grave with a stone. When he finished, he stood there a long while, staring at the horizon. Marin came to stand beside him, leaning on the fence for balance. "They won't come back," she said softly. "No," Jonas replied. "But word of this will spread." The sheriff will follow the trail. My name's still on those posters. She looked up at him, eyes steady. Then let them come. You've got nothing left to run from. Jonas didn't answer, but in his silence something inside him shifted. Something long locked away began to break loose. The days after the fight passed in uneasy calm. The sky stayed clear, the air cool, and the plains stretched wide and empty again. But inside Jonas, a storm still stirred. He spent his mornings fixing what the battle had broken. The shattered door, the cracked window, the bent rifle barrel. Maren watched him work, her side still sore but healing. Every so often she'd catch him staring off at the horizon, lost somewhere deep in his thoughts. "You're waiting for something," she said one afternoon. Jonas didn't look at her. "Just listening. For what?" "Trouble. It always rides back around." She gave a tired smile. "You talk like a man who doesn't believe in peace." "I don't trust it much," he said simply. The wind carried the scent of fresh rain, though the sky was dry. Maren turned her face toward it, breathing in. "You ever think maybe you're alive for a reason, Jonas? Maybe all that running kept you breathing for something that ain't over yet?" He didn't answer, but her words stayed with him long after she'd gone inside. That night Jonas couldn't sleep. He sat by the cold fireplace, sharpening his knife out of habit. The cabin was quiet, save for the scrape of steel. Then came a sound, distant hooves. He froze, listening. Only one rider this time, not a group. He stepped outside, rifle in hand, and waited. The figure appeared slowly through the moonlight. A man on a chestnut horse wearing a deputy's star that glinted faintly in the dark. The rider raised a hand. "Name's Sheriff Cole Avery," he called. "I ain't here to shoot." Jonas lowered his rifle, though not by much. "Then say what you came for." The sheriff dismounted, moving slowly. "Heard tell of a fight out this way. 3 dead men, one of them with a bounty poster in his pocket. My job's to find out who put him there." Jonas didn't speak. The sheriff looked past him toward the cabin. "You Jonas Redden?" Jonas's jaw tightened. "Used to be," Cole sighed. "Thought so. I've seen your name enough times. Word is you ran from Fort Sutter, abandoned your men." "I stayed when others didn't," Jonas said. "But the man who ran wore a captain's bars. He's the one still sitting pretty." The sheriff studied him for a moment as if weighing truth against rumor. Then he said quietly, "Folks in town say those dead men were part of Halden's old unit. Is that true?" Jonas nodded once. "They came for me." Cole's eyes softened, though his tone stayed firm. "You've been running a long time, son. Maybe too long." Jonas gave a tired laugh. "You aiming to arrest me?" "Not tonight," the sheriff said. "Not if what I'm hearing is true. Seems to me you just defended a widow on her own land." Maren stepped out onto the porch, a shawl around her shoulders. "Sheriff," she said, voice calm but sure. "Those men burned my home, killed my husband, and came back to finish me. Jonas saved my life." Cole looked between them. "You willing to stand by that statement?" "I'll carve it in stone if I have to." The sheriff nodded slowly. "Then maybe it's time someone else spoke for you, Redden. I'll send word to the judge in Carson's Bluff. Might be the army's ready to hear the other side now." Jonas's eyes flickered, unsure whether to hope or not. "And if they're not?" Cole swung into his saddle again. "Then you keep doing what you're doing, protecting what's worth saving." As the sheriff rode off, his figure faded into the night like a ghost heading home. Maren stood beside Jonas, watching him disappear down the trail. "You could be free," she said softly. He gave a long breath. "Freedom's a hard thing to believe in." "Then believe in something smaller," she said. "Like rest." Jonas looked at her, then at the land stretching out before them. The horizon glowed faintly under the moonlight, endless and quiet. For the first time in years, he let the silence feel like peace instead of punishment. The days turned warmer, and for the first time since Jonas had found the burned cabin, the land began to heal. Green shoots pushed up through the blackened soil, and birds returned to the fence posts. Life, slow but steady, found its way back. Jonas fixed the roof, replaced broken boards, and even painted the door. He didn't know why he bothered. He told himself he was just helping her get back on her feet. But something about the work felt right. Marin planted new seeds behind the cabin. Her limp was almost gone now, though the scar on her side still ached when she bent. She'd hum sometimes while she worked, soft and low. A tune her husband used to sing. Jonas liked the sound. It made the place feel alive. One evening they sat on the porch watching the sky fade from gold to violet. The air was cool, the kind that carried every sound for miles. Marin broke the silence first. When the sheriff said he'd send word, did you believe him? Jonas shook his head. Belief's a luxury I gave up. You ever think maybe that's what's kept you lost? He turned toward her. You think believing changes what's written on a man's record? I think it changes what's written in his heart, she said simply. Jonas smiled faintly, though it didn't reach his eyes. You sound like a preacher. Maybe I just sound like someone who's tired of living afraid. Her words settled between them like dust in the still air. The next morning, Jonas saddled his horse. I'm riding to Carson's Bluff, he said. See if that letter of the sheriff's was worth anything. Marin looked up from the field. You don't have to go alone, he shook his head. I started this alone. I'll finish it the same, she didn't argue. She just handed him a small leather pouch with dried bread and coffee beans. For the road, she said. He took it, hesitating. You sure you'll be all right here? She smiled. I've got a rifle and a stubborn streak. I'll manage. Jonas rode out before sunrise, the plains painted pink by the early light. The ride to Carson's Bluff took most of the day. When he reached town, the streets were quiet except for a few wagons rolling past the saloon. People stared as he passed, they always did, but he ignored them. He found Sheriff Cole outside the jailhouse cleaning his rifle. Didn't expect to see you so soon, Cole said. I came to hear it from your mouth, Jonas replied. The sheriff nodded toward a stack of papers on his desk. Got a wire from Fort Sutter yesterday. Halden's name came up in a corruption hearing. Turns out he's been under investigation for false reports. Jonas stiffened. False reports? Cole nodded. Including yours. Seems the truth finally caught up to him. For a moment, Jonas couldn't speak. Years of running, hiding, bleeding, all of it for a lie that was finally breaking open. What happens now? He asked quietly. Cole gave a slow smile. The Army's agreed to drop your charges. You're free, Jonas, a clean slate. The words hit like thunder, but softer. Jonas stared at the floor, his voice rough. Free. It didn't sound real. Go home, the sheriff said kindly. That woman of yours, she's the reason you're still standing. Don't make her wait too long. Jonas rode back under a sky streaked with red clouds. The air smelled of rain again, the good kind. The kind that promised new life. When he reached the cabin, Marin was sitting on the porch, mending a torn sleeve. She looked up when she saw him, eyes questioning. He dismounted, dusted off his coat, and said softly, It's done. My name's cleared. Her lips parted, surprise and relief mingling. You mean it? He nodded. No more posters. No more running. She stood, her eyes wet but shining. Then you can rest now. He gave a faint smile. Maybe I can. The wind moved through the grass, whispering across the open land. Jonas took a long breath, the kind that didn't hurt anymore. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel hunted. He just felt home. Jonas woke before dawn the next morning. The air was soft, filled with the smell of dew and wood smoke. For once, there was no dread waiting for him. No shadow from the past ready to swallow the day. He stepped out onto the porch, boots creaking on the wood, and looked out over the plains. The land was wide and endless, and for the first time, it didn't look like something he had to cross. It looked like something he could belong to. Marin joined him a little later, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. She handed him a tin cup of coffee. You slept? She asked. Better than I have in years, Jonas said. They stood side by side, watching the light creep over the horizon. The soil glowed gold. The air was alive with the sound of crickets and the slow waking of the earth. Marin broke the quiet. What will you do now? Jonas took a slow sip. Haven't thought that far ahead. I reckon I'll help you finish fixing the barn. After that, we'll see, she smiled faintly. I don't mind that plan. For the next week they worked in rhythm. Jonas mended fences and built a new chicken coop. Maren washed, planted, and cooked, her limp barely noticeable now. The sound of their work filled the days. Hammer strikes, laughter, the steady rhythm of a place coming back to life. Sometimes Jonas caught himself watching her when she didn't see. The way her hair fell when the wind caught it. The way she'd pause to look up at the sky before going back to work. It stirred something in him he didn't quite understand, something tender, but cautious. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Maren looked into the flames and said, "My husband used to sit right there." Jonas looked at the spot beside her. "I can move," she shook her head. "No, I just wanted to say it. I thought I'd never let anyone sit there again." He didn't answer. The fire cracked softly and she went on, voice low. "He died defending this place. I hated the land for a long time after that. Thought it had stolen him from me. But now," she looked toward the door, where the wind rustled the grass outside. "Now I think maybe it's been giving me something back." Jonas's throat tightened. "You think the land can do that?" "I think people can," she said, turning to meet his eyes. Jonas looked away, staring into the fire. "I ain't the saving kind, Maren." She gave a small smile. "Maybe you don't have to be. Maybe you just have to stop running long enough to see what's worth saving." He didn't reply, but the words sank deep. Later that night, long after she'd gone to bed, Jonas stayed by the dying fire. His hand rested on the old revolver at his hip. For years it had been the only thing he trusted. Now, it just felt heavy. He stood, walked to the edge of the porch and set the gun on the railing. Then he turned and went back inside. The days that followed were quiet and kind. He and Maren talked more, about small things, about the way the rain smelled when it came from the west, about how long the grass would take to grow back. He found himself smiling without meaning to. One afternoon, while repairing the last corner of the barn, he noticed her watching him. "What?" he asked. "Nothing," she said softly. "You just look different." "Different how?" "Like a man who stopped running." Jonas leaned on the hammer, thinking about it. Maybe she was right. Maybe he finally had. The sun dipped low, painting the fields in amber light. Maren came to stand beside him. The silence between them wasn't heavy anymore. It was full. Jonas looked out across the plains and said, almost to himself, "Never thought peace would look like this." Maren smiled. "It always did. You just had to stop long enough to see it." Autumn came slowly and gently to the plains. The grass turned gold and the air carried the sharp smell of smoke and pine. Jonas could feel the change in his bones, the kind of change that didn't bring fear anymore, only a calm sense of belonging. The cabin stood solid now, the roof tight, the fences mended. The land around it was alive again. Maren's fields were green, her hens busy, her garden full of color. It wasn't much compared to the world Jonas had known once, but it was enough. He still rode out some mornings just to see the land stretch beyond the horizon, but he always came back before dark. Always came home. One day he rode into town with Maren to trade supplies. The townsfolk who once looked at him with suspicion now nodded as he passed. A few even smiled. Word had spread, his name was cleared, the truth told. No longer a deserter. No longer a ghost. Inside the general store, the owner handed him a folded paper. "Army posted it last week," he said. Jonas opened it. It was an official notice. Confirmation that all charges were dropped, his record restored. He stared at it for a long time, then folded it carefully and handed it back. "Keep it," he said. "I don't need it anymore." When they left the store, Maren looked at him with quiet pride. "You sure?" Jonas nodded. Some things are better left behind. They rode home under a wide blue sky. When they reached the cabin, the sun was setting behind the ridge, throwing long golden shadows across the grass. Jonas dismounted and stood for a while, just looking at the place. The cabin, the field, the woman waiting beside him. Maren took his hand. Her fingers were rough from work but warm. "You ever think you'd end up here?" she asked. He gave a soft laugh. "I didn't think I'd end up anywhere." They sat on the porch as the light faded. Crickets began to sing and the first stars blinked to life overhead. For a long time neither spoke. The silence between them wasn't empty, it was peaceful. Finally Maren turned to him. "You don't have to go, you know." "Not anymore." Jonas looked at her, his face gentle in the lamplight. "I know." She reached over and laid her hand on his arm. "Then rest, Jonas, you can rest now." Something in him loosened then. A weight that had been buried deep for years lifted quietly, like smoke rising into the evening air. He looked out over the land, his voice low. "I rode too far for too long. Thought if I kept moving I could outdistance the ghosts, but maybe they were just waiting for me to stop." Maren smiled faintly. "And did they?" Jonas nodded. "Yeah, they stopped." The wind brushed across the plains, carrying the sound of the night birds and the faint creak of the porch boards. Jonas leaned back in his chair, his eyes soft, the firelight flickering on his face. Maren stood, went inside, and returned with a blanket. She draped it over his shoulders. "You'll catch a cold," she said. He chuckled. "You sound like someone's wife." She raised an eyebrow. "Maybe I sound like someone who cares." He turned his head and met her gaze. For a moment neither looked away. The distance that had once stretched between them was gone now, just like the road behind him. As the night deepened, Jonas stayed on the porch. The stars were bright and endless. Somewhere far off, a coyote called, and the sound didn't make him tense anymore. It was part of the world he finally belonged to. He closed his eyes for a moment and breathed in the cool air. For the first time in years, it didn't taste of dust and regret. It tasted of home. Beside him, Maren sat quietly. Her hand found his again. The two of them sat together as the plain spread out before them, vast, calm, and finally still. Jonas Redden had come a long way to find peace. Now he didn't have to ride any farther, he was already there. If you felt this story deep in your heart, don't ride off just yet. Hit that like button, subscribe to Shadow Frontier Tales, and saddle up for more stories of the Old West, where every soul's got a story, and every story's got a reckoning.